Hi, and welcome. In this video, we are going to talk about trauma. Every single person I've ever worked with has come in working through some sort of trauma. Everywhere we look in the world, we're seeing the fingerprints and the patterns of trauma. So if we want to do something with it, first and foremost, we need to be able to recognize it. We have to identify when the patterns and the themes of trauma are not just showing up in the world around us, but when they're showing up in our very own lives. Because whether we like it or not, we have been born into a world that has been traumatized. And these patterns of trauma did not start in our lives. They have been here, as we will see, for generations. And we have been handed these patterns with the opportunity to do something with it. Or we might even say the responsibility to do something with it. So, if you're trying to heal dynamics in your life, if you want to take responsibility, accountability for your life, in order to liberate yourself from these patterns, this video is for you. First thing is, let's start with defining trauma. What is it, and how can we learn to recognize it? Trauma obviously starts with the thing that happened. So, for instance, if I grew up in an abusive family, that is a traumatic situation. But the thing that happens itself is not enough to cause the trauma. The trauma is bigger than the thing that happens, in other words. The trauma is what happens as a result of the thing that happened. So, if I grew up in an abusive family, if I had an abusive upbringing, I adapted to it. Those adaptations become behavioral patterns where I continuously adapt to this situation in this way. But it's more than that too, is I then see this pattern all around me. And so I start to adapt to the world around me through this pattern. In other words, I become very constricted down to this pattern of trauma. I see it everywhere I look, as if I'm looking at the world through the lens of my trauma. And this pattern becomes automatic. I don't have a choice in it unless I can recognize it and then exercise my ability to choose something different. The ways that we adapt to trauma are very predictable. For instance, again, if I grew up in an abusive family, whether that's physically abusive or emotionally abusive or negligent, I adapt to it in very specific ways. For instance, I learned to suppress my emotions because I have learned that expressing my emotions and showing emotions equals danger. I might become hypervigilant, always paying attention to other people's emotions because I need to be able to recognize and identify if somebody is in an emotional state, it means danger. I might become a people pleaser where I try to take care of everybody's emotional needs. I try to keep everybody happy because then I can be safe. Or I might become very aggressive, where I'm going to go and assert myself or hurt these people before I can get hurt. These are just some of the very predictable ways that we adapt to our trauma. And if you look at this in your own life, can you find these similar patterns? Now, if we want to do something with this trauma, we want to start to recognize and identify it in our lives. So what we look at here is, where did this pattern first originate? For the most part, these patterns of trauma originate very early in life. And this happens when our bodies are developing, when our worldview is developing, the way that we see the world, the way that we see ourselves and how we fit into the world, when this is developing, when our nervous system is developing, when our hormonal systems are developing. This is where trauma has the most impact. But the trauma, again, isn't the thing that was happening. It's how we responded to the thing that was happening. So if you think for a moment about your own life, your own patterns of trauma, and you ask, where did this come from? Where did I first start feeling this? When did I first start thinking and acting this way? Most of the times, this goes to a very early time in our life. A question that we can ask that will help us identify where this pattern of trauma came from is when you first went through that thing that you can remember and identify, the painful thing, who did you talk to about it? Ah, this is the question where we identify the source of pain. Almost unanimously, the answer that I find is nobody. I was all alone with it. On rare occasions, people will say, oh, I was able to talk to my mother or my father or somebody who wasn't responsible for helping me through this, a friend, a sibling, a cousin. And in those situations, despite having somebody there, we find that that person's ability to connect with you and to attune to your emotional experience and help you go through it is drastically limited. So for the most part, people are all alone with their trauma. A question that we can ask to help us identify the origins of this is, how do you make sense of the fact that you had nobody to talk to? Or even further, if you have kids of your own, and if you don't, if you can imagine that you had kids of your own, and they're going through something very painful, who would you want them to talk to about it? The obvious answer is almost always me. If I'm their parent, if I'm this child's parent and they're going through pain, I want them to come and talk to me. So how do you make sense of it if you as a child were not able to go and talk to your parents? How do you explain that? The almost obvious answer is, well, I wasn't safe. I wasn't able to go and talk to them. There is the original trauma. Trauma is when we navigate something that is very painful, stressful, overwhelming in life, and we don't have the ability to go through it. Meaning, we're all alone with it. As children, we are supposed to have people there to help us go through it. See, as children, we're immature, we're undeveloped, we're unregulated, we're highly dependent on our parents. Those are the people who are supposed to help us go through the difficulties of life, the hardships, the challenges, the stresses of life. But what happens if they don't know how to do it? Or they're unable or unwilling to go through your stresses? Or further, what happens if your emotions as a child activate the trauma in your parents? Instead of helping the child go through the difficulty, the stress, they become the source of the difficulty or the stress. This is almost always the origination of the trauma. See, if we had somebody there when we were children to teach us how to go through life, how to navigate the difficulties and the stresses and the hardships and the losses, then these natural dynamics, inevitable and almost guaranteed dynamics of life in this world, they're not traumatic. We can go through them and navigate them while taking care of ourselves. And this is the goal of nature, is to create independency. But if we don't get that right there, somebody to teach us how to go through this, or maybe even if we have somebody who cares so much about us that they want to protect us from all the difficulties in life. And so then when we get older and they're not there and we don't know how to navigate it, it's the same thing. We don't have the capacity to navigate life. This is what trauma is. And so all throughout the patterns of life, the way that we adapted to that trauma continues to come up. and we become constricted, inflexible down to those very adaptations. So, whenever something slightly reminds us of that initial trauma or the pain, it triggers us, we say, we act in that exact same way. We might suppress ourselves. We might pretend that we're one way when we're really feeling another way. We might try to take care of other people's needs at the expense of our own or at the expense of people who really do need us. These patterns continue to come up. So if we want to do something with it, first and foremost, we have to learn to recognize and identify where these patterns show up in our life. Because if we don't, if we haven't done any work with this trauma, that pain from the past, it doesn't go anywhere. It just festers and it piles on top of each other. And that pain from the past continues to show up here in the present. So if we want to do something with it, first thing we have to do is learn to recognize it. We want to start to take an inventory of sorts of all the ways the pain from the past has not been processed and continues to show up in the present. And so if you're looking for freedom from those patterns that are showing up in your life and all those around you, I hope that this video is helpful. And if it was, please stay tuned, because the next one we're going to talk about those very common adaptations, not just the behavioral patterns, not just the ways that we look at the world, but the beliefs, especially of ourselves, such as I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy, or I'm responsible for other people's emotional needs. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching.